Once upon a time. Welcome to Australian Book Lovers, your destination for imagination.
Australian Book Lovers acknowledges First Nations peoples and recognises their continuous connection to country, community and to culture. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and honour the sharing of traditional stories passed down through generations. We're committed to a safe and inclusive welcome for authors and readers of all cultures and backgrounds, including people of LGBTQIA+ communities and their families.
Welcome to everyone to our writer's room today at ABL, or Australian Book Lovers as we're known. Our mission is not only about celebrating and sharing fabulous Australian and Indigenous authored books of all genres with readers around the globe. It's about finding fantastic resources and information for authors looking to write their first or next book. And what better resource than getting into the writer's room of some of these authors and asking them to share their experience. And I will mention that this is episode 131. I am Laurie Bell, science fiction and fantasy author, blogger, short story and flash fiction writer, and your co-host today, coming to you from Wurundjeri Woiwurrung country.
Thanks, Laurie. And I'm Veronica Strachan, aka V.E. Patton, science fiction, fantasy, memoir, picture book writer, your founder and co-host today. And you almost said celebrity, and I think that is really lovely because our two authors, we'll say that they definitely are celebrity. These are two authors who, in their fiction life, write happily ever afters and more. So as soon as I say HEA, happily ever afters, hopefully our listeners know that means that we have some romance writers on the screen, on the pod, in the writer's room. Thanks, Laurie. I completely missed where we were up to at the moment. So, good evening from Wurundjeri Woiwurrung country. We're both, Laurie and I, are this evening to Rowena Mabbott. Hello, yes. Rowena.
Hello, lovely to be here. And I am coming to you from Wongal country in the Eora Nation in Sydney.
Beautiful. And that, I think, is a bit like the Kulin Nation. Lots of mobs up there all around.
Yeah, the Eora Nation's huge. And the Wongal part is on the south side of the Parramatta River, closer to the city, but it stretches all the way out pretty much to Parramatta. So it's quite a long, extended river-based clan.
And our second celebrity author is Jodie Benveniste. Welcome, Jodie.
Thank you. And I'm coming from Garnerland in Adelaide, South Australia.
Beautiful. And we know Garner well from our previous co-host, Darren, who was always defending the beautiful Adelaide and Adelaide Hills against the Melbourne people. But we won't talk about that. We are around Australia. And we've got two fabulous books that both of you have written based in Australian settings. And I'm really keen to chat to you about those. So why don't we start with some bios? Laurie, do you want to start with the bios?
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. All right.
Let's do that, because then people know all about you.
Yes. So let me tell you a little bit about Jodie. So Jodie Benveniste is an author and psychologist who writes heart-expanding young adult contemporary fiction that helps you to new levels of self-understanding and emotional healing. She writes about love and friendships, family relationships, well-being and mental health healing, introducing you to your amazing inner world and its hidden depths. She's been a psychologist in the private practice, trusted parenting expert, organisational consultant, academic researcher and chair of the board of an independent school. But at heart, she's always been a writer. She's written 5 non-fiction books and a ton of articles, research papers, reports, training programs and essays, and she now writes entertaining, unput-downable and heartwarming fiction that has healing at its heart.
Oh, fantastic.
Love that.
That is just brilliant. And what a great segue, Jodie, from your day job across to fiction. Yeah. So tell us a little bit, if you would, about your day job and how that, where was the transition? What made you go from, day job to writing fiction?
Well, I think I've always been a writer. but when I was younger, I kind of got the message maybe from, parentals and maybe from society that being a writer wasn't really a great career move. And so I kind of it was always there. But I sort of thought I need to get a serious career. So I studied psychology, became a psychologist, worked in all different areas in organizational psychology and private practice, in the parenting space. But I was always writing as well, not fiction writing though. I was writing lots of nonfiction in all its various forms. And then I don't know, I hit a significant birthday, and it was just like now or never, and it was just beyond time. It was time. So the segue happened because I couldn't avoid it anymore. And it just kind of was this compelling force that I had to listen to, and so I made a bit of a commitment.
And the first book is out, which is absolutely fantastic. So let me tell everybody about Never Not Ever. So every year, Tilly dreams of the dad she's never known showing up for her birthday, but he never does. When she wakes up on the morning of her 16th birthday, dadless yet again, she knows it'll never happen. In fact, it's her worst birthday ever because her grandmother died a few months ago, her mum is working again, and the boy she's in love with, the ridiculously gorgeous Josh, refuses to break up with his drama queen girlfriend and notice her instead. Then Tilly's dad does show up, shocking everyone, and she works out an awful truth. Her mum and grandma lied to her for 16 years. Tilly is drowning in her family's lies. Worse, these feelings for her neighbour Zach, these stupid, flustering, more than friends feelings she's been trying to ignore, mean she's also lying to herself. There you go. All right. So teen angst, but more than that.
More than that, yeah, definitely teen angst. But also those experiences that you go through where you're trying to work out who you are, and you're trying to work out how you can relate to others, and you are falling in love, maybe with the wrong person, but maybe also with the right person. And then, of course, the backdrop of family. Family is always pretty central in teens' lives, where you've got that push-pull, where you're trying to kind of move away from family, but you're still ensconced. And so, it's kind of all that drama. And then mental health as well is at the heart of the story. So Tilly is going through grief and loss after her grandmother passed away. So we explore that as well.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Rowena, tell us about Rowena, Laurie.
Alrighty, so Rowena Mabbott is a certified life coach, writer, and co-host of the Two Booked Up podcast. She writes contemporary fiction, nonfiction, and monthly articles for her coaching business. And when she's not wrangling her teen boys or walking the dog, Rowena enjoys reading, singing, and spending time with her husband.
There you go. That is pretty good. And so
Yeah.
there's a fair bit of writing has happened there as well. So, Rowena, what was the things that you had to learn switching from, say, casual blogs and those kind of things and nonfiction, where things can be quite structured, into romance? And what was the move and the inspiration there?
Well, I had been started writing a memoir back in 2015, which then was the catalyst for my career change from being a HR manager and consultant to then have a pivot and become a life coach. The memoir is still hidden in my Google Drive. I've revisited it a few times. No, not lost. It's just minding its own business for a little longer. But then I think actually it was one of those, the memoir woke me up and kept tapping me on the shoulder, and like 3 a.m. I couldn't get it out of my head. And then my first novel did the same thing. So in May of 2023, I just kept waking up at what one of my very good friends calls stupid o'clock. And I just could not get back to sleep because I was imagining dialogue and scenes. So I eventually, after a few days, gave in because I thought, I just need to get some sleep. Maybe if I get this out of my head. And so I did. And by the beginning of July, the messy first draft was done. And it took a fair bit of reworking because I'd never done any fiction writing, not since I was a little girl and had told stories as a young child. So it required a fair bit of healthy editing, which I now realized is basically like 5 times as long as the writing.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I was very lucky because I had I'd always just planned for it to be a bit of fun for me, which is what it was. But then I had some very supportive people in my life who were like, no, you should definitely do something with this. So then I did. So I self-published it in the December of that same year. So it was a pretty quick process because I just, I was very impatient. And I think, Veronica, I've heard you, Laurie interviewed you in the in episode before Christmas, and you were talking about how you were just really impatient. And I thought, I'm not waiting 2-3 years to maybe hear back that they don't want it. I think I'll just do it myself.
Yeah. Good on you. Yes, absolutely. And that is definitely was me.
And it's a lot of
at
new
that
things
time.
to learn with self-publishing, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Well, and it was different from the self-published nonfiction that I'd done for my website because that was an ebook, but it was also an ebook that was full of pictures and things. So it was basically a Canva PDF that was chunky, not a EPUB novel with 80,000 words. So
it's a different skill set. Yeah.
Very different skill set. But it was fantastic, and it was embracing that growth mindset, of going, okay, I've got all this stuff to learn and it's daunting, but no one's telling me I have to do it, which makes it more fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's the blurb for avoiding the friend zone.
Thank you.
2 ambitious graduates, John and Kate, navigate I've got really good friends, John and Kate, who support the podcast. So they'll be thrilled. I'll have to send them a copy and say, hey, did you realize that she's stolen your names? Fabulous. So 2 ambitious graduates, John and Kate, navigate their careers and an emerging romance in the bustling city of Sydney in a story that will have you cheering them until the very end. Fresh out of university, John Williams moves from the country to Sydney for a coveted graduate sales role with a large company. A new city, housemates, and a new... When he attends a graduate orientation, it's Kate, a girl he can't stop thinking about. Ambitious and focused graduate in the same company, happy with Jacques, her boyfriend of more than 3 years. Despite Kate's boyfriend, John decides he can't be her friend if he ever wants to have a chance with her. 18 months later, Kate and John are working together. Kate is now single and is interested in John. A night of dancing proves they have chemistry, but will either be brave enough to overcome their previous relationship mistakes and make a move? Will avoiding the friend zone work for John? Will he have a chance with Kate, or will he end up losing her forever? This is a sweet workplace romance set at the turn of the century. Join John and Kate as they navigate work, friendships, family and relationships alongside the Sydney 2000 Olympic Games and the changing world of technology. Avoiding the Friend Zone is a tender, joyful novel about confusion, longing and love. It's a sweet workplace closed-door romance with a HER, happily ever after. And it's book 1 in the interconnected Single in Sydney series and can be read as a standalone. There we go. And I know we've had last year we had a workplace panel and they talked about it was chilies and how hot the chilies were and whether it's behind doors and all those kind of things. So closed door is obviously a one chili, just you have to imagine the romance. Yeah,
no, the
absolutely.
romance is there. It's just
the sex is behind the door.
Yes.
No, yes.
There's just no mention of it.
No mention of it.
Because I started trying to write them and then realized that was super awkward. And I had a moment thinking, my mum's going to read this. And I thought, oh my gosh, my teenage boys are going to read this. And that just completely freaked me out. And when I spoke to my boys, they were like, oh, mum, you can't. Just don't. Just please don't. So I thought maybe that was a pretty good sign that maybe I should just give that a miss.
Yeah, keep it quiet. Yeah. And Jodie, can I just ask you any romance in, there is romance,
Spicy?
Of course. Any spicy in Never
No.
Not Ever? Okay.
No,
as a
definitely
YA
not.
romance, at the cozy level.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
But you've had a family involvement in your audiobook. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, so my daughter's an emerging actor and voice artist. Benveniste, and I talked her into doing the audiobook for me.
Brilliant.
And she did such a fantastic job. It sounds amazing. And I don't know how she did it, actually. She didn't even read. I mean, she'd read the book, but she didn't sort of prepare by reading the chapters before actually narrating. She just like launched into it, and it kept it really fresh. And then a good friend of ours also was did the mastering for the book. So it's been a group project.
Fantastic.
So
Yeah. Obviously, she wasn't embarrassed about any of the scenes within the book then. No, that was okay.
No.
Yeah.
Not that she mentioned.
Oh, very good. Did you run any of the scenes, being a YA, did you run any of the plot or anything past her, or is this something that, no, it was just had to get out there and you just delivered it?
Well, she was the first person to read it after I'd written the draft, and she gave me enough positive feedback that I gave it to a couple of others. And then we went from there, and went through the whole developmental edit, copy editing, proofreading, all the stages, all the steps. And it was like actually so enjoyable. I just loved writing it.
That's good. And how long did it take you to write?
So the first draft was about 3.5 months, 4 months maybe, and then I put it aside for a couple, and then came back to it and did a bit more editing, and then it went to the developmental editor, and came back around. So yeah, and I decided to independently publish as well, even though I've had experience as a non-fiction author with traditional publishers. And this time I really wanted some agency, and I also was not patient either. And I just kind of had a bit of a vision for it, and I wanted to go with that.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Laurie, your turn, because I've been hogging the questions.
Yes, no, well, I was about to say, so it's interesting because you've both had a diverse career outside of writing well before the writing bug hit you both, and yet you both got to a point where the story just needed to be told and was really pounding down the brain door trying to get out. So why do you think these particular stories needed to be told? Rowena, do you want to start?
Yeah, I think for me, it was mostly about fun. And I think it was, I'd been listening to an audiobook at the time, and maybe that had planted the seed. I think it was called The Last Love Letter or The Last Love Note by Emma Gray. She's an Australian author based near Canberra. And there was a line in that book, fiction, that basically said something along the lines of, you've got to write what you know, but you need to put enough detail in there to make it seem like it's real. And I suspect in hindsight, and this is something I realized maybe in the last 5 days, so it's a new realization.
Okay, yes, it's fresh.
Is that I think possibly that had been worming its way into my head, and therefore these things, because it's set when I met my husband in the workplace, like my main characters do. The Olympics seemed like an earlier time that was a bit simpler. I mean, it was complicated, but it was before the terrorist attacks in the US. There was no social media to speak of. Australia seemed to be in a state of, it was really just a very cool time. It was a very positive time. Sydney particularly felt like it was a party city without being over the top party city. Everything felt kind of holiday-like, and I thought it's such a nice time. I remember that so fondly. I'd like to set a story then, because it gets away from a lot of the things that are potentially complicating in relationships. But we can go back to that idea of why meeting people in the workplace, or meeting people in a pub, or meeting people at uni. So yeah, I don't think that really answered your question, Laurie, but
no, but I think it did in a way. Because it makes me wonder with particularly with you both having such solid careers and being both brilliantly intelligent people, that maybe your own brains were reaching out for a new challenge, perhaps.
And perhaps a new creative outlet. That might have been something to do with it too. Yeah,
Jodie?
for sure.
Yeah, I suppose I always considered myself a writer, even though I never really admitted it. Like deep down, I knew it, but I didn't kind of give it much airtime. And then I just couldn't keep it down anymore. And then when it was time to write, I got kind of strategic, like, because that's my kind of, business brain started to think, right, we can map out this series and blah. And then it was like, that just was not the book that wanted to be written. And when I sat down, it was like, no, it was this 16-year-old that just started to like, I started to it was a very different writing process to writing my nonfiction books, because with the fiction, it was like an act of deep listening rather than thinking, planning, working out. And so I had to listen, I had to sit still and listen, and that's the story that wanted to be told. But then the other side to that is I can probably trace sort of, there's an emotional through line from my own life that sits within the book. It's not that what happens to Tilly did not happen to me, but there's certainly some emotional some emotional experiences that we both shared. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And then the other side to that is I also wanted to speak about mental health healing, not just mental health, and not just dealing with mental health or coping with mental health, but I wanted to actually talk about healing. And I'd been in private practice as a psychologist and been working with a really amazing healing modality, a therapy. And I wanted to sprinkle it into stories so more people, it was more accessible to people, to teens, to parents of teens, and to those of us who, we all have an inner teen who has some energy that we can bring into and allow into our lives. So I wanted to really explore that too.
Fantastic.
I'd like that inner team to come back a little bit to me. Mine's a little bit far away now. But come on back, inner teen, which would be good. Can I ask you then a little bit along a similar line, but just, diving a little bit further? Do you bring your own understanding of what love means to your writing, or has that fiction writing helped shift your concept of love in the real world? Jodie, what are your thoughts there?
So I think the basis of all love is self-love, and I think that is one of our greatest challenges and journeys. And I think relationships, whether they are friendships or whether they're more intimate, all have provide an avenue for growth and learning, and transformation and change within ourselves and between the two people or not people involved. So I feel like love is one of those kind of platitudes, but it has such depth to it. And I think that's why people can construe romance novels as being kind of light and fluffy, or, a bit silly or unimportant, when really there's nothing more important than love. And I think when we get to be involved in a love story, not all of us are involved in a deep, beautiful love story, maybe right now in our lives, or not in the quite same way when we meet someone new. So we get to relive that. We get to, it is heart expanding. It is expansive. It is something that we can connect to again. And I just love the space that story allows to explore love in all its different forms.
Yeah.
Beautiful answer. Rowena, what do you reckon?
Well, I love what you've said, Jodie, because I agree wholeheartedly. And I would add to that and kind of build from that and say I think that different forms of love can show us, like love stories and romance stories, I think show us how perhaps we can experience love. So in answer to your question, I think there's a little bit of art imitating life and life imitating art. Certainly, I know with the characters that I've written, both the female and the male characters, they have a learning the transformation and the learning that they have to go through. And sometimes it's about learning about themselves. Sometimes it's learning about what they are looking for in a partner or in a relationship. But sometimes it's just about learning how to be a good friend, or how to be a good granddaughter or a grandson, or particularly in avoiding the friends. And there's a lot of grandparents in that. There's grandparents are fairly pivotal to the story, and our parents and siblings. In the second novel, No More Simon Says, which we haven't mentioned yet, that's much more about friendships and so a little bit of sibling stuff as well, because the siblings are also friends with the main characters. So I think that there's something where we can read about how people experience love, and that can show back to us, that can sort of shine a light back on our own life to say, oh, maybe I'm not getting the love I need, or vice versa. You can say, well, I'm coming from a place where I feel safe and secure in my own life, and I can appreciate that other people might not have that experience because I'm reading about characters who are experiencing different things that I've never experienced. But it helps foster compassion and kindness that way too, which are elements of love. And as Jodie said, there's nothing more important.
Yeah. So speaking of the happily ever after, so many romance novels, there's kind of those the two strands, really, I guess you could say, where you have your tragedies where love all falls apart, thriller, drama, horrible stuff that goes on and they don't end happily, and then you have your happily ever afters. Why did you both go with a happily ever after?
Because it feels good.
Yep, pretty much. That's exactly
it's
why.
So much fun. It's how we want things to be. It's what we really, really want. And so why not go there in a story? Why not?
And also, I think building on that, Jodie, I think we're in violent agreement is that's the only bit of violence we're going to have, ladies, is because we not just want that, we actually need that. And for the people that I know that I'm writing for, we need to have the escapism of saying relationships work out well. And the two novels that I've published so far, the people are in their 20s. So it's the stage where it's really optimistic and it's hopeful and, they're just getting together. Maybe if I'm writing a novel with a bunch of, older people, maybe my own age or a bit older, where they're still happily married, it probably won't sell as well. But it would also be nice to read to say, oh, look, it works out. We like to have those feel-good moments, and we need to well, some of us, romance writers, and possibly therefore we read that too, we like to have those stories because they make us feel good, but they also restore our hope and our optimism, which is quite important too.
I was wondering that given the world as it is at the moment and what you see on a day-to-day basis with various wars and crimes and all sorts of things, it is that hope and that happily ever after and that it does work out and that it is okay and that you are safe and that there's a lot there that I think you do connect with as a reader, where and as with every romance, particularly with a happily ever after, is you do know it's going to go through stages. There's some pretty clear genre points that you're going to hit, which is going to be the misunderstanding or a big breakup halfway through and then the coming back together. So you know how it's going to end. And I think that knowing before you get there is actually really nice.
It's the comfort food equivalent, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like your comfort reading. My youngest child has comfort reading because he rereads the same books over and over again, which I remember doing. But now as an adult, I'm like, I don't have time for that. There are so many other great books to read. But I completely understand that when you're younger and you go back to the books you love and you reread and reread until you've read them and you pretty much could say the whole book out loud. And I think genre writing has had a very bad rap. And I used to be quite dismissive of it. But now that I've listened to a bunch and read a bunch to kind of familiarize myself, and also just because it's good habit, I actually really love them. I love a cozy crime, and I love a clean romance. I actually am not a big fan of the super spicy ones. They make me a bit cringy, as my kids would say. But yeah, I think that there's a place for all the different stories. And at different times, we need a different story to help us through whatever we're going through.
Yeah.
And I think with a happily ever after, yes, you know the ending, but you don't know how they're going to get there.
Yeah,
and
correct.
That is the intrigue. That's what you're there with these characters. They have to navigate all these different issues. Like love and coming together is not easy. It's very vulnerable. It's a vulnerable space. It brings up, all of our stuff. And so they have to actually change and transform to get to the happily ever after. So we want to go along with that on that ride with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in real life, it might take people years to get to that point. But in a story, we have to get them there generally within kind of 70 to 80,000 words. So it all has to be
True,
sped up a little bit.
You don't have 24 years. Come on.
Correct.
All right, both of you are incredible practitioners in the human condition. Let me just say, as you know, as HR and coach and as psychologists, tell me when you're developing characters, and I know it sounds as though both of you had a muse that just said, "This is me, this is who I am," but what came first, really, the character or the plot, you know, and how did that character develop in your mind? Was that easy to do as such great observers of the human condition? Jodie, let's ask you first.
So it was important for me to understand. So I think Tilly, 16-year-old, she came to me as kind of the starting point. And then I needed to work backwards and say, how did she get to this point in her life? And so I delved into her backstory, and I needed to work out what were those key sort of life events that marked her life that that meant this is who she was in this moment at the beginning of the story. And then from there, sort of the rest of the characters appeared because they were important for telling her story, really. And so, yeah, her psychology, her backstory was really important. And it's also really relevant to the mental health stuff that's in the book, because, you know, sometimes we can think, oh, I'm just an anxious person, or, oh, I'm just going through a depressive period, but there's always a source for mental health issues, always. And there's a way to navigate that and to move through it and to move beyond it and not just have to kind of manage and put up with it. So I needed to know what had gone on for Tilly, so that she's at this point where her grandmother had died 3 months earlier, and there was a lot of stuff going on, family secrets coming out. What was it that was driving her? What was her like biggest, deepest desire, and what was also her biggest misbelief about her life and herself?
Fantastic. And obviously lots to draw on from your own teenagers as well as your practice. Yeah. But you're not going to admit that to your daughter, so that's okay. Rowena, characters, plot.
So it's different for each book. So the first one was the plot and the characters came together because I already knew exactly what was going to happen. And the first scenes I wrote were actually ended up being about halfway through the book. They were the first things that came to me. So then I kind of had to work backwards and forwards from there. The second book was definitely character, because I took one of the secondary but key characters in the first book, and it's then telling her story, but a little bit after. So her story starts just a bit before the epilogue from the previous story. So they're standalone, but there are enough references that if you enjoyed the first one, you might like the second one, because a lot of the same characters appear. But yeah, so definitely in the second one, it was character pretty much all the way. And then I went, I've got these great characters. I've got this group of friends. I've just have this brilliant idea of all these friends. And then I was like, they're going to have to do stuff. So that was definitely, then I was like, oh, I better think of a plot. I mean, I had a very loose idea of a plot, but then I needed to add in some more complication, a little bit more conflict, and a few other things. So yeah, two different approaches, I think, to get a similar kind of, they're about the same outcome in the terms that they're both stories of young people in their 20s. They're both happily ever afters. They are both in the Single in Sydney series, so they've kind of got that in common.
Would you say some of the lessons learned from book one helped you with book two?
Very much so. Because book one, I hadn't ever done any fiction writing before. My editing was, let's just say, really massive. And there was an awful lot of rewriting and deleting and moving things around. I had a friend who's an editor who was fabulous and very generous and gave me terrific feedback. But yeah, the editing required for that was enormous. The editing required for the second one was still a fairly chunky amount of effort and time. But because I'd learnt from the first one, I knew much more about doing, okay, take them into the scene, don't do so much telling, because I think in answer to one of your earlier questions, I was still very much, when I first drafted the first book, I was still in telling rather than showing. So I was able to, perhaps my growth mindset, I love that phrase because I use it with my clients all the time. My growth mindset meant I had learnt that lesson, and I won't call it a mistake. It was definitely a lesson, and I tried to apply it more consistently, let's say.
I love that. I love that. And Jodie, how is your next work going?
Yes, so I got it back from the developmental editor at the end of last year, and it's in pretty good shape, very good shape actually. And so I'm just doing some rewriting now, and I'll publish it sometime this year, probably around middle of the year. And then I also started book 3. So like Rowena, I've got a group of friends, characters, and they each have their own story in each book. And yes, so they're standalone, but you can also read them as a series if you wanted to. So yeah, there's 3 in the pipeline.
Fantastic. It's amazing once the bug really hits you, it's very hard to push it aside.
That's right. Yeah, it takes over.
Yep.
It's like a little bit of a drug. We get a bit addicted to it, don't we?
Yeah.
Can I ask you then about the romance genre, and interested to hear from you, Rowena, given that you chose to step back to a slightly simpler time to write your story. How do you think the romance genre has changed over the last decade or so?
Well, I noticed that the books that I read, either if they're straight romance, they tend to have a lot more spiciness, but otherwise maybe not always. So that's not a very good answer, but it depends, I think, on the author. And so some of the ones that are very successful, some of those I find are a little bit too confronting. And I know that a few couple of months ago, there was a bit of feedback in the Sydney Morning Herald from a parent who had purchased a book that had an image on the front that implied that it would be appropriate for her younger teen, and then was appalled to find that it had quite explicit scenes in it. And as a parent myself, my kids have already told me they don't want to read that. And they're both avid readers, but they don't want to read that stuff. And I'm like, fair enough, that's their choice. I'm not going to make them. But yeah, I think it's different from like a Nicholas Sparks type of book, which is, there's nothing in there. It's all about the slow burn. Having read a couple of those, I found them, honestly, just between us and all the people listening, I found them very frustrating. Not because of the slow burn, but because I was like, he just kept saying he or she all the time. And I was like, I'm trusting that it's the same he. But you've said he for like 3 pages now, and is it the same dude? Like, I'm confused. Should we just throw his name in, just like for people like me who maybe picked this up halfway through because they fell asleep with it in their hands? So, I think in terms of the last 10 years, maybe there's some more spice. I think the complexity with the social media aspect and the online messaging and the apps has given new opportunities for entertaining stories. There's been terrific Australian stories set very recently that have a lot of fun with the apps particularly. And they've been very entertaining. And I think that there's an increase in the rom-coms as well, where there's a lot of scope within the app type of basis, where they're on the Tinders or whatever else, that they can really exploit plenty of humour in that space, which maybe there was always humour, but it was it was maybe more slapstick or more subtle. So yeah, that would be that'd be my 2 cents.
Beautiful. What about you, Jodie? What changes have you seen?
Well, I think we've seen romancy take off, haven't we?
Romancy, yes.
Romantic fantasies are off the charts. And I think that's really interesting because we talk about sort of the comfort reads and when you're in the fantasy world, plus you combine it with a romance, it's sort of almost this heightened, extra heightened drama that you can create. And people, I think, are really loving that. And then the other thing I've noticed too, like Rowena said, is just I feel like there is a lot more spiciness and also like weird, kinky, crazy, left field, all sorts of stuff that you can find, particularly with the rise of ebooks and you know, you can find there's like really niche genres within the romance bigger genre now, and romance readers are voracious.
Yes,
which
they
is
are.
fantastic.
Yeah.
And they read and read and read, and so you're just seeing, you know, romance is really taking over the book world, and I think that's not a bad thing, really.
It's sort of become more acceptable, hasn't it? It used to be you'd put your romance book inside something else, or you'd read it on your phone or a Kindle or something, so no one knew what you were reading. Whereas now people are proudly reading it, you know,
on the train,
on the train, on the beach, wherever, in the cafe.
Yeah, very good.
So with the Australian settings in both of your stories, I want to hear a little bit more about that. But we mentioned time period just then, but certainly the Australianness of romances just brings out another element to the story and the storytelling. So tell me a little bit about the locations that you picked and why you decided to set your novels in that spot. Rowena, do you want to continue?
Sure. So it's a bit clear because it's the Single in Sydney series. So I kind of decided to like go all in. So both books, Avoiding the Friend Zone and No More Simon Says, are set in Sydney, and book 3 and book 4 will also be eventually in Sydney. One of them will have a little brief respite in London for a bit, but book 4 is definitely in Sydney. I chose because it's my city and I love it, and there's a lot of opportunity to make the Sydney, and particularly they do a bit of traveling around New South Wales, almost like a character in itself, because I haven't done a huge amount of descriptive passages because that's not what romance readers necessarily want. And also I needed to get into the action between the people, not spend pages and pages rhapsodizing about how beautiful, you know, the harbour is, because, you know, they can Google that. But yeah, so in Avoiding the Friend Zone, John is from the country. He's from a place called Armidale on the New England Highway, so inland, about 6 hours from Sydney. He goes back there, notices it's drought because back in 2001 we had an extreme drought, and it had been for many, many years. So all of those sorts of details needed to feel genuine and authentic for for myself, because I find that stuff is annoying otherwise. But Sydney is my favorite, one of my favorite cities, and it gave lots of scope for romantic moments, great restaurants that I know I've eaten at that place. Also New South Wales, because they go and do things. So in the second book, the girls go away for a weekend to the Hunter Valley. They have lots of fun drinking. The boys go off and do lots of hiking. So they go off to the Warrumbungles. They go to the Blue Mountains. At one point, Simon goes all the way down to Cradle Mountain, goes hiking. So there's lots of references to Australia because they are definitely Australian books written by an Australian author. So it would be wrong for me to try and emulate something else. Plus, it's hard when you love your own city to look past that.
It is, and we love to read about places that we know, because let's face it, the US is the biggest market. You weren't tempted to base your stories in the US just to sell books?
I thought that's why I kept it clean, because there's a huge market of US people who love a clean and wholesome book. They search for that. That was a piece of advice from one of my friends who lives internationally, and she said, when I was struggling and I shared with her, she said, there's a whole market that really does like clean, happy ever afters. So it felt like a giant permission slip.
Fantastic.
There may well be a book set in America because I have lived there. There'll definitely be books set in the UK because I've lived there too. But at the moment, Single in Sydney. But doesn't have the same ring if I put it somewhere else.
No. I like the alliteration.
Jodie?
Well, I actually lived in Sydney during the 2000 Olympics, so I remember that time very fondly as well. Sydney was very special around that time. But my hometown, the town I love, is Adelaide. It's not a town that is featured very often in fiction, and it felt really important to me to have it set here. Particularly the YA contemporary romance genre is dominated by US authors and US settings. And we go through really universal themes when we're a teen. So to me, it was like, we can have a story set in Australia and we can educate US people about some of our idiosyncrasies. And I actually worked with a US developmental editor because I wanted to get that perspective. If there was anything that didn't make sense to her as an American, and she said, this has got universal appeal. So yeah, I love that that's it in Adelaide. I think it's not in the same way with you, Rowena. It's not like a big feature, but it certainly holds a space for the story.
Yeah.
And you'll find that romance, as you say, they're so voracious, but they will actually travel based on their favorite books and come to explore and to see the scenes and the sights that they've seen. So it's a nice little touristy plug as well.
Yeah, why not?
And I think there's also something for Australian audiences to be able to read something that's set in our own, because Jodie's absolutely right. So many romance books, and especially YA, are set in the States or occasionally England. There are very prolific writers in both those spaces. And even I was thinking about this morning. My characters, they live at home. They're in their 20s, but at least one of them lives at home because they can't afford to move out, because that's an Australian thing. Well, if in the States they go off to college and they don't tend to move home again, whereas here we don't tend to do that. Our kids go to university, but the vast majority live at home. They don't go and live on campus, and they very, very few of them go and live and move interstate. Most stay and go locally. And so they can still be 24, 25 living at home. And that is increasingly common. Even 20 years ago when the books are set, it was still pretty common. Like all my friends, we were all, because we couldn't afford to move out.
Well,
So,
they move out and they come back, Rowena, let me say.
they boomerang.
They
boomerang.
in the country, they like to go into the city to go to uni or whatever, but then they come back because they got no money.
Yeah, correct.
I love you all. Love you all.
But it's nice to have that reflected in our stories, because to be reading, as a young person, to be reading a book that says the messaging is saying you should have moved out, that can actually make you feel a little bit rubbish. Which, if you're already feeling a bit stressed about all of that, to Jodie's point about mental health, you could actually, if all the cultural content that you're consuming is telling you that you should have moved out and you should be setting up your own place, it's pretty hard to keep thinking, well, I'm okay living at home with mum and dad, even though I'm a fully grown adult, and by my age they were already married. Like that's... it's sometimes important to have different messages that say, hey, you know what, you're okay.
Yeah, absolutely. You both spoke about editing and how important the editing was in your journey to delivering a great story. What other resources do you think were critical in helping you put a good book out into the world?
Well, for me, it was self-belief. I feel like that was the most important thing, because I started to kind of track back when I first started to sort of really be drawn to fiction writing. And I was always a voracious reader as a kid. I used to read stacks of books in no time. I lived in a small country town where they had to send books from Adelaide because I'd read them all, I read all the ones in the library, that kind of thing. But then, I also remember like going to the library and borrowing all the Writer's Digest magazines and reading cover to cover and learning about craft from a very young age, even though, I wasn't doing a lot of writing. And then I wrote a couple of bad novels when I was at university, and they're in the, not on the hard drive, in the bottom drawer kind of thing. And, and then it was like, so it'd always been there. It'd been lingering. It was there. And it was just, it was almost like I just needed to believe that doing something as crazy as writing a novel was possible, and sit down and do it. And then, of course, everything that comes after that around publishing is a different side. And then, of course, selling, that's a whole other side. But the writing is, as I said, like, was this act of listening and of ultimately self-belief.
Yeah, brilliant. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so editing, which you talked about, I think it really is hard work, but I think the key things for me were, because you asked about resources, one was actually reading. So setting, as Jodie mentioned, setting the manuscript aside for a couple of months, and then just reading everything I could about editing, but also in my genre. So before that, I would probably have defaulted to either a non-fiction to talk about on the Two Booked Up, or a bit of crazy crime, or somewhere where there was like an awesome female lead who was a bit, kick-ass. I do love that.
We love those.
Yes, I love those. It doesn't really matter what genre, as long as there's an awesome female lead.
That's right.
Preferably written by another female, then I'd like that ticks all my boxes.
Yes.
So I did a lot of reading of the genre. I did a lot of learning. So there's a platform called Readsy, which is based in both the US and the UK, and they have a plethora of available resources. They also have editors, but as I mentioned, I had a editor friend who was fabulous and was very willing to, well, not maybe very willing, but she was very kind. She was very kind. She was
She's
very,
your
very
friend. Perhaps you could ask that.
Yes. No,
Good.
we've known each other since our eldest children were in kindergarten, and our eldest boys have just finished HSC. So we've known each other a fairly long time. But also feedback. So for editing, I had beta readers and then second round beta readers. So I don't know if they're still called beta readers. The very first person who read it and who gave me excellent feedback and did a bit of copy editing as she was going through, sort of saying, I think you didn't mean this word, that kind of thing. But otherwise was reading it from a holistic perspective. And then I had other people who read it and said, I think this phrasing is not right. I'm not sure about this. And then I had my friend who was the editor who read it through. And then I had beta readers as well. So there was a lot of sharing and receiving. And then for the second novel, I also had a writers group. So by that stage, I had found some people. I met with them. We shared a lot of things, read it out loud. We get a lot of useful feedback that way as well. So I think for the editing piece, my tips would be, yes, it's hard work. Do set aside a massive chunk of time. Like, assume it's going to take you at least as long as it took you to write it, maybe 5 times as long. Assume you're probably going to tear your hair out more than once. And maybe put a sign up on your door that says, be aware, there's a lot of swearing going on. Don't freak out. Don't worry. It's okay. I'm not being attacked by, a supervillain. But yeah, I think that would be, the main thing is it's doable. It's just not, at the first time it's quite hard. And then you kind of go, okay, it's a very different, I think, Laurie, I heard you say when you've got your editing hat on, like in editing mode, it's a very different mode. And I think I heard you say something like that. And I thought, yes, that's exactly right. It's a very different mode of operating.
Yeah, you really have to change your complete mindset of what you're looking at and how you're looking at it to when you're writing. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I appreciated that.
So speaking of then, let's jump onto that and continue on. So for new writers, so for advice for new writers they haven't yet got that plot or they've got the bare bones of a character, what advice would you give that new writer, particularly in the romance genre, but just in general, what advice do you have? You've finished a book. That's huge. So what advice would you give to a new writer? So Rowena, do you want to continue?
Yeah, sure. I think just what I said is read a lot in the genre that you plan to write in, because that will help you know what you want to cover, and also get a sense of, okay, what are the key points that need to happen? Like, can I just have them rock up and meet each other and then be done? No, you actually have to put a whole lot of other stuff in there. So, for example, the feedback from my first novel was that it was just a bit boring the first time round. So I had to put in a whole lot more complexity because it was just way too sweet and kind of dull. So the rewrites involved a lot more complexity. So reading a lot, definitely, which should be no problem because if you're writing, you probably love reading. Talking to people and getting people's feedback. My writers group's been fabulous for that, and things that I thought were pretty good, they've been able to say, yeah, that's great, or I love that, or oh, look, you've got that same word in the same paragraph that I might not have even picked up. And then in terms of the writing, just have a crack. I've got a very good friend who that's her favorite catchphrase, just have a crack. But also to keep doing it, even when you're writing, I know that on this podcast you've talked about it before. You might write 3 or 4 pages and in the edit you might realize there's like one decent sentence. But you've got to write those 3 or 4 pages to get to that one decent sentence. And that would be my tip for writers who are just starting. Just write it. Write it for yourself. Don't worry about the audience. Don't worry about anything else. Have fun with it. If you're writing it because you love writing, just write it. And if you get stuck, go for a walk. Yes. Or dictate it or talk it out with a friend. Brené Brown wrote one of her books basically by talking it out with her friends and then quickly writing it down. So there's nothing to say you have to sit in a room by yourself and bash away at a keypad or write it in a journal or whatever. Do what works for you.
That's fantastic advice.
Definitely good advice.
Jodie?
I love all those ideas, but I also want to say you don't have to listen to all the advice because I feel like there's so much, and that's not referring to anything you've said, Rowena, but like just the landscape of writing is that there is so much advice and there's so much. If you haven't spent 5 years, write with blood, sweat and tears, it's not a very good book. And then, there are people who write their book in 10 minutes and, so it's like there's so many stories around writing and there's so much advice and sometimes you have to write every day and you have to do this, and it's like, okay, well, and I think it's okay to kind of go off and explore and certainly learn about craft, certainly do lots of reading, but then you then have to bring it back to yourself and you have to filter it and you need to see what resonates and you need to just follow that and see where it takes you. So just back yourself a little bit as well.
Yeah, I think I can hear that self-belief. Tell me, Jodie, where can people find you online?
So my website is jodiebenveniste.com and you can buy my book, audiobook, ebook, paperback through and merch. Got merch as well through my website. And then it's also available on all the other your favourite retailers. And also I'm on Instagram at Jodie Benveniste Author and Facebook as well, Jodie Benveniste Author.
Excellent. Thank you. Rowena.
So similarly, my website is my name, so rowenamabbott.com. And similarly, my Instagram is also my name. And the books are available, like Jodie, on my website, but also on Amazon and all the other platforms. Mine are ebook and paperback. And both books are on there, as well as some short stories. There's a free short story available on most of like a free ebook short story, which is one of the Single in Sydney stories. So the main character from Avoiding the Friend Zone appears in that. And there's some nice little Easter eggs in there if you read that first, that when you read the main, like the Avoiding the Friend Zone, you're like, now I know. The tiny things, only things that make me giggle. But and then there's a few references to that in No More Simon Says as well. So that's kind of fun stuff. But so rowenamabbott.com and all of the links are on the website. So
and of course they can hear you on your podcast.
Yeah, which is currently having a little break because it's summertime. But yes, so Two Booked Up, we talk about non-fiction books and then we take the conversation a bit further and we kind of, rather than doing like a Cliff's Notes, we sort of talk about what were the key takeaways and how we implemented them in our lives or in our businesses or with our families.
Fantastic.
Which is, so incredibly important. So a leadership program that I'm doing at the moment, in the olden days, I would have just given people the reference, given them the academic papers and said, there you go, knock yourself out. But some of the people that were helping with the design, they said, we haven't got time for that. You have to give us the YouTube. We need to see the PDF of the summary. You need to do this, this, and this. I said, oh, right. But it's been amazing to see that so many people have done a similar thing, Rowena, you know, where they've gone, okay, these are the 3 key messages when I was reading this, that, or the other book. And yeah, I mean, I do love a bit of a non-fiction book. I'm booked in for the Heath brothers have just released Reset, which is one of their change and project management. I don't know if you know the Heath brothers, but they're lovely.
I do. Yeah,
excellent.
that works great.
Yes, love their work as a change manager. So yeah, I can still get excited about non-fiction. I do love it. I've got a ridiculous amount of books behind me, most of which are non-fiction, apart from my Chickabellas, which you can see the
Yes, I love your
there.
Looking
Bells.
beautiful, Chickabella.
Which is good. So having time, which is like Laurie and I, we could just chat all day about books, which is why we did one of Just Us before Christmas. Thought, you know what? Let's not invite anybody. Let's just talk about each other, which was just lovely. So
That was great.
having someone to just soundboard ideas and to really share those messages is so important. Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
Very good. Final word.
I think, yes, we're up to, oh, goodness. That's
Yes.
Time has passed so
Go
quickly
read-
tonight. It's
go
been so
read some
fantastic talking
romance.
to you.
Yeah, go read some romance.
Go read some
good.
romance, and thank you to for both of you for what you do to provide this space and share Australian writing. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
And of
Most
course, if you
delighted.
jump onto the website, well, you will be able to find your books and links to
Indeed.
all sorts of fun things. So
Yes, and a little bit more about the authors. So please
Yes,
jump on
share
there, and
around.
all of their links, if you missed it while we were chatting, they're all there on the websites.
Yes.
So as we finish up, we love to finish saying, please remember to read more Aussie books. So can we ask you to stay there with us?
Join in with us. We're always terrible at it and we're always
Yeah.
out, but that's fine.
It's organic.
It
I love a bit
is.
of organic, Laurie. So that's good. So readers, don't forget to
To
read
read
more
more
Aussie books.
books.
Thank you both to Jodie
Bye
and
for
Rowena.
now.
Thanks, Laurie. Bye for now.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's meet again when magic happens.